In a few months, Australia hopes the International Court of Justice will rule that Japan's whaling in the Southern Ocean is illegal. The two nations have been embroiled in a diplomatic row over the practice for years, and in the past few weeks, the matter has finally made its way onto the international legal stage. Before the ICJ, Japan is arguing that its whaling is scientific and that it therefore complies with international rules. Australia's counter-argument is that that's false and that Japan is clearly using its whale cull for commercial purposes. Australia's Attorney-General Mark Dreyfus, a former QC, is this week arguing Australia's case in front of the ICJ in The Hague. He joined me a short time ago. Attorney-General, we've heard the anti-whaling arguments many times, so let's not go over that. But could you please explain in layman's terms what evidence Australia is presenting to the International Court of Justice that Japan's whaling is commercial and not scientific?
That is our case, Lee, that Japan's whaling, which has been going on in the Southern Ocean now for decades, whaling that's killed more than 10,000 whales since 1988 when there's been a moratorium in place, that whaling is commercial whaling dressed up as science.
You say that it's commercial whaling dressed up as science. What I'm getting at though is, what's your evidence that it actually is that?
Well, it's about approaching this through looking at the program as a scientist would. We say that it's objective. We say that, and we've given evidence to the court about this, that there's quite a lot of institutional arrangements that Japan has had for very many decades, and what they did when the moratorium came in was to simply go on with those institutional arrangements, go on with their whaling company, go on doing pretty much the same as what they had been doing before the moratorium was put in place. And that's one of the points we make, that they were doing commercial whaling up to the introduction of the moratorium in the Southern Ocean. After the moratorium, they simply rebadged it as a scientific program.
Is the ICJ's ruling enforceable? What if Japan chooses to keep whaling?
Japan is a good international citizen. Japan and Australia are friends. We expect that Japan will comply with any ruling of the International Court of Justice, just as Australia would comply with any ruling of the International Court of Justice.
Is it enforceable though? Does it have any teeth?
There are enforcement arrangements, and I don't think it would come to that. As I say, Australia and Japan are friends. We've got a deep and long-standing relationship, and we are bringing this case in the International Court of Justice because that's where nations go to resolve their disputes after they've failed through diplomatic means to reach an agreement.
If the ICJ rules in favour of Japan, will the Australian government accept that decision and move on?
Well, we'll accept the decision, just as we would expect Japan to accept the decision, but we're going to keep working with other nations in the International Whaling Commission to get Japan to stop their program. We've brought this dispute to the court because those diplomatic efforts and negotiations over the past several years haven't produced a result. But if the International Court of Justice rules against us, that the Whaling Convention does permit Japan to do what it's been doing for many years, we'll keep arguing in the Whaling Commission with other nations. More than 30 other nations directly support the point we're making here in the International Court of Justice, and we'll keep discussing this with Japan.
How is it that Australia has turned this issue into the most high-profile aspect of our very important relationship with Japan?
Well, as I said before, that's what nations do when they've exhausted diplomatic means, particularly when they're nations with as strong and deep a relationship as Australia has with Japan. Bringing a case to the International Court of Justice to resolve the dispute shouldn't be thought of as particularly unusual. It should be thought of as something that's a sensible thing to do. It's what civilised nations do to resolve disputes. And as I say, I've got no reason to think that whatever the result, that anything will occur other than that the Australian relationship with Japan will endure, and resolving this dispute one way or another is likely to strengthen our relationship.
You've talked about being friends and strengthening the relationship, but before the court you've described some of Japan's statements as offensive to Australia. Japan in its testimony has said Australia's on an emotional anti-whaling moral crusade and that it strongly objects to the grave allegation that Australia makes in accusing it of acting in bad faith. Don't those sort of statements prove that this issue has done damage to the relationship?
Not at all. This is litigation, Lee. Both Australia and Japan are conducting their cases robustly, and that's because a lot's at stake. But one of the things about litigation is that when you have the arguments in a clear way, it helps the court get to what are the true issues.
Before you go, on another matter, the Prime Minister Kevin Rudd has proposed that the Labor Party makes changes so that future party leaders are elected 50% by the parliamentary caucus and 50% by a plebiscite of branch members. Do you support that idea?
I've worked on party reform in a range of ways, Lee, for many years. And I support any reform that gives more say to rank and file members of the Australian Labor Party, so I do support this reform.
How about the 75% of members of the parliamentary caucus required to have a spill motion? Does that not entrench too much power in the incumbent?
Well, I think that that's a matter of detail. What I was talking to you about a moment ago was the key point of giving rank and file members a say. I think that we can obviously discuss the detail. That's what we'll be doing at the special caucus meeting that's coming up to discuss this proposed rule change.
Do you back the 75% point?
I'll have to talk to my colleagues about the detail of that, but in the broad, I absolutely support the measure to give more say to rank and file members of the party. And I'm overseas at The Hague arguing the international whaling case when this announcement was made. I'm going to have a think myself about the detail, the mechanics of the rule.
Attorney General Mark Dreyfus, thank you very much for joining us from The Hague.
Thank you, Lee.